My name is Angela Patterson, and at 67 years old, I've built an empire from absolutely nothing. I started my cybersecurity company in my garage in 1987 with a maxed out credit card and a dream to protect people from digital threats. 38 years later, that little startup became SecureGuard Technologies, the industry leader that Fortune 500 companies trusted with their most sensitive data. I came from dirt-poor beginnings in rural Ohio. My father worked double shifts at a steel mill, and my mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. They never lived to see me become successful, but everything I built was to honor their sacrifice. I believed in treating people fairly, paying employees well above market rate, and giving back to communities that needed it most. Over the years, I donated millions to scholarship funds, homeless shelters, and small business grants. 3 years ago, my marriage to James ended after 30 years together. Not because of any dramatic betrayal or infidelity, we simply grew apart. James wanted to travel the world and rediscover himself, while I was still obsessed with growing my company. Our divorce was amicable, mature even. We split everything 50-50, and he moved to California to start his art therapy practice. That left me with the most important relationship in my life, my son Jerome. He's my only child, my pride and joy, and honestly, my best friend. Jerome had inherited my work ethic, but also his father's creativity. He worked as a marketing director for a nonprofit, genuinely caring about making the world better. We had dinner every Sunday, talked business strategy, and he was the only person who could make me laugh until my sides hurt. Now, here's something most people didn't know about me. I carried a small digital recording device everywhere I went. Call it paranoia, but in the tech world, corporate espionage is real. I'd been burned early in my career by a business partner who tried to steal my patents, so I learned to document everything. Conversations, meetings, phone calls, I recorded them all legally, of course, always informing people when necessary. To know how doing this saved my life, hit the subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. As we continue this story, everything changed 2 years ago when Jerome met Leslie Hartwell at the Pinehurst Country Club. I remember the day he brought her home for dinner. She was 28, stunningly beautiful, with that polished East Coast sophistication that comes from generations of old money. The Hartwells owned textile mills, had connections in politics, and Leslie carried herself like American royalty. At first, I was charmed by her. She was articulate, seemed genuinely interested in Jerome's nonprofit work, and asked thoughtful questions about my business. When Jerome told me he was going to propose after just 6 months of dating, I was concerned about the speed, but I saw how happy she made him. I paid for their wedding, a $200,000 affair at Martha's Vineyard that looked like something from a magazine. Leslie insisted on every luxury detail, and I happily wrote the checks because I thought I was investing in my son's happiness. But within months of their marriage, I started noticing changes in Jerome. He became distant during our Sunday dinners, checking his phone constantly. When I'd ask about work or his personal life, his answers became vague, almost rehearsed. It was like talking to a stranger wearing my son's face. Leslie started inserting herself into conversations that didn't involve her. When Jerome and I would discuss business, she'd suddenly appear with questions about company finances, market valuations, and my retirement plans. She had a way of making these inquiries seem casual, even caring, but something felt calculated about her timing. Then I noticed Jerome pulling back from family traditions we'd maintained for years. He missed my birthday dinner for the first time ever, claiming Leslie had planned a surprise weekend getaway. Our regular golf games became monthly, then stopped altogether because Leslie needed him for various social obligations with her family. The real red flag came when I started reviewing our family financial accounts. Jerome had access to a trust fund I'd set up for him, and I noticed unusual withdrawal patterns, large sums being moved to accounts I didn't recognize. When I casually asked Jerome about it, he became defensive and evasive, behavior I'd never seen from him before. But what really disturbed me was how Leslie's interest in my business decisions intensified. She'd ask pointed questions about acquisition offers, company valuations, and succession planning. During family gatherings, she'd steer conversations toward my health, my energy levels, and whether I was considering retirement. It felt like she was conducting research rather than making conversation. And every time I caught her studying me a little too intently, she'd flash that perfect smile and change the subject. I started to realize that Leslie Hartwell hadn't just married my son. She'd strategically positioned herself in my family for reasons that had nothing to do with love. Last year, I started receiving calls from acquisition firms interested in buying SecureGuard technologies. The offers were getting serious. We're talking generational wealth numbers. After months of careful negotiations, keeping everything under strict confidentiality agreements, I finally accepted an offer that would change everything. $500 million. My plan was simple, and something I'd dreamed about for years. I'd retire, donate 60% of the proceeds to establish a cybersecurity education foundation for underprivileged kids, and give the remaining 40% to Jerome. $200 million would set my son up for life, while still allowing me to make a meaningful impact on the world. The sale was supposed to be completely confidential until the final paperwork was signed. I'd only told my lawyers and financial advisors, making everyone sign additional NDAs. But somehow Leslie found out. I suspect Jerome mentioned something carelessly during one of their conversations, maybe about Mommy's big business meeting, or questions about our family's financial future. Whatever he said, it was enough for Leslie to piece together what was happening. Her behavior changed overnight. Suddenly, she was asking direct questions about my health, my age, and whether I'd updated my will recently. During a family barbecue, she casually mentioned how unfair it was that elderly people hoarded wealth instead of passing it to younger generations who could actually use it. Then came the phone call that made my blood run cold. I was in my study reviewing contracts when I heard Leslie in the hallway, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I crept closer to listen, and what I heard made me realize I wasn't dealing with a gold digger. I was dealing with something far more dangerous. "We can't wait much longer, Catherine. She's already 70. What if she decides to donate everything before she dies? What if Jerome doesn't inherit what we expected?" There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end. "I don't care how it looks. We've invested 2 years in this family. I've played the perfect daughter-in-law. And I'm not walking away empty-handed because the old woman wants to play philanthropist with our money. Our money." She'd said our money. That's when I realized Catherine Hartwell, Leslie's mother, wasn't just a frequent visitor anymore. She was a co-conspirator. Catherine started showing up at our house multiple times a week, always with some excuse about helping with party planning or wanting to spend time with the family. But I noticed how she and Leslie would disappear into private conversations, stopping abruptly whenever I walked into a room. I knew they were planning something, but I had no idea how far they were willing to go. That's when I made a decision that probably saved my life. 2 weeks before my retirement party, I had a professional security company install hidden cameras throughout my house. Tiny, virtually invisible devices in the living room, kitchen, study, and anywhere guests would be gathering. What I discovered over the next several days was beyond my worst nightmares. I watched Leslie and Catherine researching untraceable poisons on the dark web. I have footage of them discussing dosages, timing, and how to make my death look like a natural heart attack. Catherine brought printed articles about substances that wouldn't show up in standard autopsies. But the most chilling moment came when I watched Leslie meet with someone in a parking garage. A thin man in a dark coat who handed her a small vial in exchange for an envelope of cash. She held it up to the light, examining the clear liquid inside, before carefully placing it in her purse. I had everything documented. Every conversation, every meeting, every piece of evidence. I could have gone to the police right then and had them both arrested. But here's the thing. I needed them to actually attempt the murder to make charges stick. Conspiracy is one thing, but attempted murder with clear intent and method? That's a life sentence. So I made a calculated decision. I would let them try to poison me at my own retirement party, but I'd be ready. If you think I'm crazy for letting it get this far, Make sure to subscribe because what happens next will show you exactly how I turned their murder plot against them. The night of my retirement party arrived. I'd invited over 100 people. Business associates, friends, neighbors, even some former employees. The ballroom at the Grandview Hotel was decorated beautifully, with jazz music playing and champagne flowing freely. Leslie was unusually attentive that evening. Normally, she'd work the room, networking and making small talk with influential guests. But that night, she stayed close to me, constantly asking if I needed anything, offering to refresh my drink, being the perfect, caring daughter-in-law. Every time my champagne glass got low, Leslie would insist on getting me a fresh one. "Let me take care of that for you, Angela. Tonight is your special night." She'd smile that perfect smile, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. Around 9 p.m., during the toasts and speeches, I watched Leslie walk to the bar. She thought she was being discreet. But I had a clear view as she pulled the small vial from her purse and emptied it into a champagne flute. She stirred it quickly with a cocktail stirrer, then walked back toward me with that poisoned glass. "Here you go, Angela. A fresh champagne to celebrate your incredible success." I took the glass, thanked her warmly, and waited for the perfect moment. Catherine was standing just 3 feet away, holding an identical champagne flute, laughing at something one of my business partners had said. When both women turned their attention to the speaker giving a toast about my company's legacy, I made my move. One smooth, practiced motion, the kind of sleight of hand you learn from 30 years of high-stakes business negotiations. I switched the glasses. Catherine never noticed. She raised her glass during the toast, took several generous sips, and continued socializing. Leslie watched me carefully, waiting for signs that the poison was taking effect. But instead of me collapsing, it was Catherine who started stumbling. First, she seemed dizzy, grabbing onto a nearby table for support. Then her speech became slurred, and she started sweating profusely. Leslie's face went white as she realized what had happened. She rushed to her mother just as Catherine's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto my marble floor, foam beginning to spill from her mouth. The rest, as they say, is history. Here's my question for you. If you discovered someone close to you was planning to murder you for money, would you have handled it the same way I did, or would you have done something different? Let me know in the comments. The paramedics worked on Catherine for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Her pulse was weak, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, Detective Morrison was already reviewing the security footage on his tablet, his expression growing darker with each frame. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, looking up from the screen, "we need to talk. Privately." The party guests had been moved to a separate area of the hotel while crime scene technicians processed my house. Jerome stood in the corner, his face pale and confused, staring at his wife as 2 officers placed her in handcuffs. "I want to see the footage," Leslie demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. "This is all lies. She's setting me up." Detective Morrison turned the tablet toward her, and I watched the color drain from her face as she saw herself clearly adding the powder to my champagne glass. There was no denying it, no explaining it away. "Leslie Marie Patterson, you're under arrest for attempted murder," Morrison announced as he read her rights. That's when my son finally spoke up. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Jerome's voice cracked with emotion. "This can't be real. Leslie wouldn't. She loves our family." I looked at my son, my brilliant, trusting, heartbroken son, and felt my heart shatter. He was caught between the woman he'd promised to love forever and the mother who'd raised him. The confusion and pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. "Jerome," I said gently, "I have months of evidence. This isn't a misunderstanding." But Leslie wasn't done fighting. As the officers prepared to take her away, she started screaming accusations. "You planned this. You knew what I was going to do, and you let my mother drink it instead. You're a murderer. You tried to kill an innocent woman." That's when Detective Morrison dropped the bombshell that changed everything. "Mrs. Patterson, we've been investigating your financial records for the past hour. You're in debt to several offshore gambling operations for over $3 million, some very dangerous people who don't accept late payments." The room went silent. Even I was shocked. I'd known something was wrong, but $3 million in gambling debt? That explained everything. Jerome stared at his wife in disbelief. 3 million. Leslie, what is he talking about? Morrison continued. The threatening email started 6 months ago. Pay up or face consequences. You've been liquidating assets, jewelry, even your mother's property to try to cover the interest payments. Leslie's perfect composure finally cracked. The sophisticated, charming woman I'd known for 2 years disappeared, replaced by someone desperate and cornered. You don't understand, she screamed at Jerome. They were going to kill me. These people don't just threaten, they follow through. I needed that inheritance money now, not years from now, when your precious mother finally dies of old age. The betrayal in Jerome's eyes was devastating to watch. So you decided to murder my father? It wasn't supposed to be murder. Leslie's voice broke. Catherine researched everything. It was supposed to look like a heart attack. Clean, quick, painless. He's already old. He's already lived his life. That's when the full scope of their plan became clear. Detective Morrison had been in contact with the hospital where Catherine was being treated. Once she was stable, she'd confessed everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'd been promised a 20% share of my fortune. $100 million for helping her daughter execute the plan. Your mother-in-law admitted they'd been planning this for 8 months, Morrison told Jerome. Ever since they learned about the company sale. They researched your father's habits, his health, his dietary restrictions. They even had fake medical documents prepared to support the heart attack theory. Leslie collapsed into a chair, all fight gone out of her. I loved you, she whispered to Jerome. I really did love you at first. But when I realized how much money was involved, when I saw what kind of life we could have, and then when the gambling debts got out of control, I had no choice. You had every choice. Jerome shouted, tears streaming down his face. You could have asked for help. You could have told me the truth. Instead, you tried to murder my mother. That's when Leslie looked directly at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. I watched you for months, Angela. I studied your routines, your relationships, your health. I convinced myself you were just a selfish old woman hoarding money that could save my life. But you weren't, were you? You were going to give most of it away anyway. She was right. The foundation I'd planned would have helped thousands of kids get cybersecurity education. The remaining money would have set Jerome up comfortably, but he never would have inherited the massive fortune she'd been counting on. I started planning your death the day I learned about the sale, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. Catherine found the contact who could provide untraceable poison. We researched dosages, timing, everything. I practiced slipping things into drinks for weeks. Detective Morrison made notes while she spoke. Every word was being recorded, sealing her fate. The worst part, Leslie said, looking at Jerome one last time, is that I really did love you. But 3 million in gambling debt with people who break kneecaps as a warning? Love doesn't pay those kinds of debts. Only your father's death could save me. As they led her away in handcuffs, Leslie called out one final thing that haunts me to this day. I hope you can forgive me, Jerome. I hope someday you understand that I didn't want to become a monster. But desperate people do monstrous things. The ballroom fell silent, except for my son's quiet sobbing. In one night, his wife had been revealed as his would-be stepmother's attempted murderer, and his family had been shattered beyond recognition. But the story wasn't over yet. Because what happened in the courtroom, and how justice was finally served, would prove that sometimes the good guys really do win. The trial lasted 3 months, and every day felt like reliving the nightmare. But justice, real justice, was finally served. Leslie Hartwell Patterson was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for attempted murder in the first degree. The judge called it one of the most calculated and cold-blooded attempts at familicide he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. Her gambling debts, the months of planning, the manipulation of family relationships, everything painted a picture of premeditated murder, driven by pure greed. Catherine Hartwell received 8 years as an accessory to attempted murder. Her cooperation with investigators and her confession helped reduce her sentence, but the judge made it clear that being a mother doesn't excuse helping your daughter commit murder for money. The day after Leslie's sentencing, Jerome filed for divorce. I watched my son sign those papers with hands that shook, but his voice was steady when he looked at me and said, "I should have listened to you sooner, Mum. I should have seen who she really was." Our relationship, which had been strained and manipulated for 2 years, began to heal immediately. We started having our Sunday dinners again. Jerome moved back into his old apartment, and slowly we rebuilt the trust that Leslie had systematically destroyed. But here's the thing that might surprise you. This experience didn't make me bitter or paranoid about people. Instead, it opened my eyes to something much bigger than my personal situation. During the investigation, I learned that elder financial abuse affects over 5 million Americans every year, with family members being the perpetrators in over 60% of cases. Adult children, in-laws, grandchildren, and caregivers systematically steal from elderly relatives, and most of it goes unreported because families are too ashamed or too trusting to believe their loved ones would betray them. I realized that my hidden cameras, my documentation, my systematic approach to catching Leslie and Catherine wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about creating a blueprint for other potential victims. So I took my experience and founded the Patterson Elder Protection Foundation. We teach elderly people how to recognize financial manipulation, provide free legal consultation for suspected abuse cases, and most importantly, we help families have honest conversations about money, inheritance, and trust before crisis situations develop. But here's what I need to tell you, and why I'm sharing this story with complete strangers on the internet. I suspected Leslie was dangerous long before that retirement party. The hidden cameras weren't a last-minute decision. I'd been watching her manipulate Jerome for months, documenting her increasingly aggressive questions about my finances, recording her suspicious phone calls. I could have stopped her earlier. I could have confronted her privately, maybe even helped her with her gambling debts if she'd been honest. But I needed absolute proof, not just for my own protection, but for any other victims she might target in the future. You see, people like Leslie don't just try once and give up. If I'd simply kicked her out of the family or paid off her debts, she would have found another elderly target, another family to infiltrate, another fortune to steal. By letting her attempt murder and documenting every step, I made sure she could never hurt anyone else. The prosecution used my evidence to build cases against the offshore gambling rings that had been threatening her, the contact who provided the poison, and even the country club where she'd been running smaller financial scams on other wealthy members. My decision to let the plot unfold saved dozens of other potential victims. And yes, if you're wondering about the money, I kept my original plan. $400 million went to establish cybersecurity education programs for underprivileged kids, and the remaining $100 million went to Jerome, not as an inheritance, but as seed funding for his own nonprofit work. Jerome used his portion to expand elder abuse prevention programs nationwide. He's become a nationally recognized expert on financial manipulation, speaking at conferences and training law enforcement agencies. My son took the worst experience of our lives and turned it into his life's mission to protect other families. The Patterson Elder Protection Foundation has now helped over 12,000 families recognize and stop financial abuse. We've recovered more than $50 million in stolen assets and seen over 300 perpetrators prosecuted. Today, 3 years after that retirement party, Jerome and I are closer than we've ever been. We've learned to be more careful about who we trust, but we haven't let Leslie's betrayal make us cynical about love or family. Jerome is dating someone new, a social worker named Joan, who's been thoroughly vetted by both of us, though in a much more open and honest way. We've learned to have difficult conversations about money, expectations, and red flags before they become problems. Catherine was released from prison 6 months ago. She wrote me a letter apologizing and asking for forgiveness. I haven't responded yet, but I'm considering it. Not because what she did was acceptable, but because holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it. Leslie still has 9 years left on her sentence. Jerome gets letters from her occasionally, which he throws away unopened. He says he's forgiven her for his own peace of mind, but he's not interested in rebuilding any kind of relationship. As for me, I'm 70 now, healthy, and happier than I've been in years. I spend my days running the foundation, playing golf with Jerome, and yes, dating a wonderful man named Patrick who thinks my story about surviving attempted murder makes me mysteriously attractive. My question for you is this. If you suspected a family member was planning to hurt you for money, would you confront them directly and risk them getting away with it? Or would you do what I did and gather evidence even if it meant putting yourself in danger? Let me know in the comments. Because unfortunately, financial elder abuse is more common than most people realize. And your answer might help someone else facing a similar situation. If you want to make sure you never miss stories like this, hit that subscribe button because unfortunately, this isn't the only time I've had to outsmart people trying to steal from elderly victims.